Last week, FBI agents raided the Los Angeles County home of an accused cult leader featured in a recent Netflix docuseries.
Attention, anyone inside, come to the front door with your hands up. We have a search warrant.
It happened early Friday morning at the home of Pastor Robert Shinn in a gated community 15 miles north of downtown L.A. Federal authorities say the raid was tied to a criminal investigation involving sex trafficking, money laundering, and tax evasion. Some former members of the pastor's church say this raid is long overdue.
We feel liberated. We feel that finally maybe there's a chance for justice to be served.
Video from the raid shows at least 5 people in handcuffs outside the home, but there is no official word on any possible arrests thus far. The pastor in church were the subject of a Netflix docuseries called Dancing for the Devil, the 7M TikTok Cult. The 3-episode series aired last year.
Let's bring in legal analyst Mary David to talk more about this case that's got a lot of attention. My goodness. Let's start with just what charges is Shinn currently facing? What kind of prison time could he be looking at if he's convicted?
He is looking at a lot of charges on the table. There is sex trafficking, tax evasion, money laundering, and mail fraud. The highest penalty would go to the sex trafficking charge. He's looking at 15 years to life on that.
How does the church play into all of this, and what are some of the accusations from the former members?
Well, coercion is especially sinister when it involves a religious leader, which is an element to prove in a trafficking case if you're talking about adults. And here, where you have a religious leader who is almost seen as a connection and gateway to God for victims, that presents an incredibly powerful and persuasive figure for them to then feel like they are potentially risking their salvation or the salvation of others if they don't do what they say. And here, with the Netflix documentary, there were accusations that millions of souls would be lost if a certain amount of wages were not given back to the church. So it can really strengthen that link. Again, if we're talking about minors, we don't even need to show coercion, but we do often see in trafficking cases a link between religion being used as a way to perpetuate harm.
What kind of evidence are investigators looking at this point in the case?
Well, they are going to be looking for any evidence that can speak to the sex trafficking charges and the mail fraud, the tax evasion. So that would be surveillance footage, text messages, the laptops that these communications could be on, in any emails or exchanges that show that the leader was in fact trying to recruit these people and bring them in to perform against their will.
So I did not watch the docuseries, so I'm really not that aware of some of the accusations. But in terms of sex trafficking, what kind of charges or what kind of accusations have come out of from the members?
Well, in the documentary, there was at least one victim who was 15 years old who alleged that she was forced to engage in a lot of performances that were, where she was cut off from her family. They weren't allowed to speak with her. There have been a number of accusations that were raised about that, this almost cult-like mentality where victims are separated from those that they love and forced to overturn part of the wages that they gain to the leader. There were also allegations that some of the victims were forced to perform for very low wages. We're talking $15, $30 for many hours of work.
And then how does this case compare to the allegations surrounding Sean Diddy Combs?
This is different from that if what is alleged coincides with what we've seen in the documentary. For example, these involve potentially child victims, and so you don't have to prove the force, fraud, or coercion. If there is any sort of sex act being exchanged for money, that automatically would constitute trafficking. It's important to note too that some of the other elements, this is a shorter time frame that we're looking at, and so there would be less holes for any jurors to poke through with the case, so that strengthens it. And there's also the fact that here you have a leader who is tied to a religious entity, as opposed to a lot of people had a hard time making a distinction with the Diddy case that Sean Combs was separate from Combs Enterprises. So I think it would be a tighter case if RICO is alleged. And we know that with search warrants, often there are certain crimes that are brought forward there, but then what's actually charged could be more or less depending on what they find.
The TikTok dance connection here, were they actually getting enough clicks or what have you to get money to give to the church? Is that how it worked?
Well, it doesn't really matter how many views there are for this to be labor or sex trafficking, but if they were being used in such a way that a certain number of views led to monetization that was then going back to the leader, or parts of their wages were being withheld or forced to be turned over, then all of those things could be elements of trafficking.
All right, Mary David, legal analyst, thanks so much for being here. You can follow her on Instagram at Miss Mary David. There's a look at it. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.